guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and I'm excited to bring you another desk project that I built recently. I know I've been building a ton of desks lately, and this will probably be the last one for a while, but this one is a little bit different with its corner design, its curved top, its two-tone wood corners, and its inset shelf. So if you guys are ready to get building, let's go. A friend of mine requested this desk a few weeks ago when I was in the middle of posting back-to-back desk builds, and I swore that it would be the last desk that I made for at least a few months. But as much as I'm kind of over the desk building, I did really enjoy adding the little details on this one and using red oak with a touch of walnut to bring it to life. Now, because lumber prices are insane right now, instead of using mostly solid wood for this build, I used red oak plywood for the majority and only used solid wood for the legs and a few trim pieces. That saved a ton of money, but it still kept a pretty nice look. To get started, I began gluing up the legs. I made these desk legs by trimming down 1x3 oak boards to about 31 inches and gluing them up in threes. I needed 8 legs total. But I only had enough clamps to glue up 4 at a time, so I repeated the process twice. And while one set dried, I set them off to the side and began cutting down the plywood. I used my Craig rip cut to rip a couple of strips from the first sheet to begin making the desk base cabinets. I've got detailed plans with dimensions and a plywood cut diagram linked below, so if you're looking for all of the exact measurements, check the description. I cut these strips to length using my miter saw where I could and my AccuCut for the larger pieces. And then I finished up the legs. At this point the glue was dry, so I trimmed the legs to length on the miter saw, and because 4 of the legs will go under the top and the other 4 will come up flush with the top, I trimmed these legs accordingly. So 4 were 29¼ inches long and the other 4 were 30 inches long. Then I cut them to their final widths on the table saw. Since gluing up 3 1x3s gives me a 2¼ inch by 2½ inch post, I wanted to trim a 1/4 inch off to make it a 2¼ inch square post. So I first ran it through the table saw, just barely cutting one edge to clean up the glue lines, and then I adjusted my rip fence and cut the 2¼ inch. Now that I had square posts, I could finally start assembling the side panels. The right side cabinet of this desk has 2 side panels the same depth, so I started with it first. I used dowels and wood glue to assemble the plywood panels flush to the inside of the legs. I made sure to make one side with the shorter legs, keeping it flush across the top, and the other side with the longer legs, letting them stick up about 3/4 inch from the top. I also wanted to attach the back panel flush to the inside of the legs too. And since my dowel jig laps over the edge of the leg to clamp and drill, I needed to mark both back legs and drill dowel holes before assembling the sides. It helps to label everything here to keep markings and pieces straight. So once I had all my dowel holes drilled for both the side and the back panels, I glued up 2 side panels first. Once I had the panels assembled, I clamped them and set them aside to dry. While the glue was drying, I prepared a bottom panel assembly for this cabinet. I cut a bottom panel and a front trim piece from 3/4 inch plywood and edge banded the edge that will be exposed. Then I drilled pocket holes along the edges of the bottom panel and into the ends of the front trim piece. I glued and screwed the trim piece onto the front so it was ready to install after the glue dried on the sides. Now finally things start to come together a little bit. Once the glue had dried on the side panels, I glued the back panel into one side panel and placed the bottom panel assembly into the cabinet and screwed it in place. Once one side was together, I added the other side and then clamped the back until the glue was dry. And while the glue was drying, I installed a little piece into the front of the cabinet here that will just sit below the drawer box that I'll add later. I just used some more scrap plywood with edge banding and attached with pocket holes and screws. Now, this desk isn't huge, and I wanted the user to have some extra leg room, so instead of bringing the entire shelf the full depth of the desktop, I built it inset. So one side of this cabinet will be narrower than the other side. Other than the differences in dimensions, I assembled these side panels with dowels and wood glue just like the other cabinet from earlier. The wider panel has the legs that stick up 3/4 inch in this case, and just like before, I pre-drilled all of the dowel holes for the back panel before assembling the sides together. Once the sides were dry, I then attached the back. This time I didn't install the back and the bottom panel at the same time, I just glued the back panel in place, used some corner clamps to keep it square, and then came back later to add the bottom. While that section was drying, I moved on to build and install the drawer box in the right side cabinet. So first, I installed a pair of 16-inch drawer slides to add an inset drawer, and then I built the drawer. I built a lot of drawers, so if you watch many of my videos, you probably know this process already. But if you want more details on how I build and install drawers and drawer slides, I'll link a super detailed guide below. I built a single drawer here, cut dados in the bottom of the sides, and assembled using pocket holes and screws with a 1/4 inch plywood bottom slid into the dados. Then I installed it into the cabinet, allowing for an inset drawer front. I cut and edge banded a piece of oak plywood for this drawer front and just screwed it in place through the front of the drawer box. To finish off this right side cabinet, I added an adjustable shelf by drilling shelf pin holes along both sides of the inside of the cabinet and cutting a piece of plywood for the shelf. And then I moved back to finish up the right side cabinet. So at this point the glue was dry on the back, so I cut a piece for the bottom panel and a little trim / support piece to go underneath it, and drilled pocket holes along the edges. Instead of installing this trim piece on the front of the bottom panel, this time I installed it underneath to provide some additional support. I screwed the trim piece in first, then applied some wood glue to the top of it and set the bottom panel in place. I installed this panel into the sides and back of the cabinet using pocket hole screws, and to finish it off, just like the right side cabinet, I drilled shelf pin holes and cut a shelf to place inside. Now all that's left is the top. I cut the top from 3/4 inch oak plywood, and just for kicks and giggles, I made the corner curve a little bit. This is purely decorative, so you can leave it square if you wanted. I just did a curve. So I traced out where to cut to fit over the two cabinets, and then used a large round piece that I found in the shop to trace a curve. I cut this top out using a circular saw for the straight edges and a jigsaw for the curve. Now I test fit it and traced where to cut the corners so that it would sit flush with the outside legs. But I ended up having some issues with accuracy. I'm just not that great with a jigsaw. Okay, so one of the struggles that I was really having with this project is because I'm not building it like on site, it's gonna have to be delivered from my shop somewhere else. It's gonna have to stay in 3 pieces. So we've got the shelf piece for the right side of the desk, the cabinet piece for the left side of the desk, and then a top piece that will have to sit in place and connect all together once it gets where it's going. So I really needed these pieces on the corner to fit tight, because it's not like I could putty or epoxy any of the gaps, because they were gonna have to be able to come apart. So that said, I tried to be really careful cutting these, and I think the issue is that this post is not perfectly square. So I kind of made a mark on the plywood on the bottom side where to cut, and then I used a actual square to darken my lines, and I followed the darker lines with a jigsaw, and it ended up not coming together nice and snug and tight here on the corner. It looks really terrible. So instead I grabbed a piece of scrap walnut that I had. Oak would work fine for this as well, but I had walnut and I thought the two-tone look might look pretty cool. So this time I laid this on here and I traced, and I cut along the traced lines instead of using a square. And it fits a whole lot snugger. Snugger, is that a word? A whole lot tighter. And this time now I can putty and epoxy these cracks here and leave this piece in place, and then just cut the top off where I need to cut it so that I can attach the top to this piece once it gets where it's going, and I don't have a lot of gaps or cracks to worry about. So I cut and glued these end pieces in place on both the left and the right side cabinets. And then I trimmed the ends of the plywood top the width of my boards so that they would all fit together nicely. I didn't get a video of a lot of these finishing details, but I just epoxied over the joints where the walnut meets the oak legs, edge banded the plywood top, and added some 1x3 trim to the bottom of the cabinets. Once the glue, epoxy, and edge banding was dry and sanded well, I gave everything a few coats of Minwax Helmsman poly, glued a piece of scrap onto the drawer for a drawer pull, and put everything together. To attach the plywood top to the walnut end piece, I just picked up some flat brackets and screwed them in from the bottom side. I'm sure there are plenty of other ways to do this, but this just made it really easy to put it together and take it apart, and it kept it really sturdy. I also added a couple of small corner brackets on each cabinet to keep the top sitting flat. Truthfully, I was somewhat concerned that the middle would flex a little bit without any additional support, but it's surprisingly strong with just a couple of brackets. And now it's ready to be put to good use. I really like this design. It's simple, but it has a few unique yet subtle details that I really enjoyed adding in. The accidental two-tone is probably my favorite part, even though it is a reminder of a pretty significant mistake. So if you're looking for a practical and unique corner desk, I've got the details, plans, and full written tutorial linked below, so be sure to head over and get building. And I promise to bring more builds that aren't desk to the channel soon, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on what's coming next. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, happy building!